Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining in from. I'm Kaushalya Gupta. I'm a policy program manager at the World Wide Web Foundation. We're founded by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, to shape a safer, a better, and a more empowering web. I'll soon be joined by the policy director, Katherine Townsend, and really looking forward to actually having this session with you. We're just waiting for Kat to join, and she should be here any moment. But basically, to give you a run through of what today's training session is about, we're going to apply design thinking and human-centered design for co-creating multi-stakeholder technology, policy, and product solutions. So, the design thinking approach, which is like usually attributed to the Stanford D School or IDEO. I noticed that early, I think a few hours ago, there was a session on an introduction to design thinking. So hopefully you may have joined that session and gotten the basics of it already. But this is basically something that is in wide use in product teams and companies. And now we're trying to kind of see how we can actually leverage these kind of principles to solving policy problems. So to go on to the next, so just to give you an introduction of the Tech Policy Design Lab, the Web Foundation's Tech Policy Design Lab is a space for policymakers, tech companies, and web users to work together on solutions to the biggest challenges that's facing our internet world, especially. So this is a place where we convene stakeholders from different groups. We bring them together because we feel that sometimes, it's not just about creating the best solution, but the solution that is basically addresses two components. One is something that puts users first, and secondly, creates a minimum viable product. And for that, it's really important to have stakeholder buy-in. And that's why this Tech Policy Design Lab approach, and it's an approach, you can see more about it on our website, but you can also kind of have this approach for your own organization. You can use this in your own projects. And that's what we'll be sharing more widely. This is basically a place where you can kind of convene different kind of expertise, break across silos, and actually find a joined up solution that has a higher likelihood of actually being adopted, implemented, tested, iterated on. So the lab, like our lab at the Web Foundation, is currently focusing on tackling deceptive design. It was earlier called dark patterns, and now it's called deceptive design. So we're trying to build solutions for trusted design. We've been using human-centered design and design thinking to build product and policy solutions that promote trusted design patterns. So, one of the core guiding values of the lab is how to be solutions oriented, not just focus on the problem, but actually think about the solution. And secondly, how can we be collaborative? How can we actually leverage the expertise from different stakeholder groups? We don't believe that we are the experts on this issue, but what we do believe is that we have the convening power to reach out, build trust with different stakeholders, different sectors who are actually working in the problems already in silos, and get them to actually work together on creating solutions. And so this project actually builds on our first pilot project on online gender-based violence. So this happened last year. We presented at the UN Generation Equality Forum. When Kat Townsend joins, she'll be able to share more about this. But the great news is we actually work together with tech companies, with civil society, with users, with all sorts of different groups like academia. And this process actually led to creating a certain set of outcomes, which we call prototypes. And since we engaged, all these different, decision makers from these kind of companies throughout the process, they actually made commitments to actually make the platform safer for women and actually test the prototype. So my colleague and teammate, my boss, basically, Kat Townsend, will be sharing more about, how we recently kind of did an auditing process and kind of went back to the companies and asked them, did the solutions that, that came out of the lab, did they actually work? If not, how could they work better? how have these kind of inputs really helped them improve their processes? So this is basically an iterative process. Design thinking is not just a one-time approach. It's actually, it's a mindset that you kind of use over and over again throughout the journey of the project, even after the project is done. So once you've kind of handed it over to the people with the decision-making authorities, to the people with the power to change policies, you kind of go back and revisit what you've actually created using these principles to see if it's not working, how can we actually use this approach once again to see how we could make it work. I'll just stop here for a moment and just see if Kat has joined. But I don't think, actually the kind of setup, it's very simple, but like this is kind of different from the regular Zoom. So there may be trouble joining, but anyway, I will continue with my slide of the presentation. So
she'll join you shortly. She's currently in the backstage trying to move into the webinar.
Exactly, like the web. Exactly.
Yes.
It's actually very simple to join. And thank you so much to the entire team for making this possible. I think we've been joined by Kat, so I will let her take over.
Thank you so much, Kaushalya. You are doing such a great job in giving an overview of everything that we've been working on. So I think you all probably don't need me on this call, because this is really about how we've been using human-centered design in driving policy and driving policy forward. But so that we have it for the session and for the recording, I can just give an overview of what it is that we have been doing at the Web Foundation and why we've been decided to start to tackle these issues. So I'm going to try to share my screen with you all. Hopefully it comes up clear, and I'll just look for a thumbs up to make sure that you can see it. Any thumbs up if you can share my screen? Wonderful, thank you. So this is a presentation from the Web Foundation and a training from our team. And the tagline from the Web Foundation is that the web is for everyone. And the reason that we have this approach is because our inventor, our founder, is actually the inventor of the web. Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented websites a little over 30 years ago. And the idea behind this invention is that the internet, which is connecting different sites together, different companies together, different people together, at the time was really only for academics and was only for those in the military. And Tim had a vision to say, well, what would happen if everybody in the world could connect and could share their creativity and their ideas and their voice with each other? So he invented websites so that there was a visual and a more appealing way for us to share our information and connect with each other. And it's really led to everything that we know of as being online today. So what our organization does, the Web Foundation, is to work to steward that original vision. And how do we build digital equality where everybody around the world has the same rights and opportunities online? And essentially what you're looking at is trying to create a global governance structure for the web, which I'll get into in a moment. So how do we begin? Well, as we know, had to begin with data. What do we know about the web? And what are the big issues on the web? What are the harms? And so we've been running something called the Web Index. And this is a survey at the time of the global status of the web, and we looked at things like net neutrality, traffic online, where it was getting throttled, where it wasn't, empowerment, gender, and privacy and surveillance are our big issues. And in doing this, we also found a lot of major fundamental barriers just in the language that we use online. So you see from this chart that English is a very small portion of the primary language spoken around the world, but on the internet it's over 50%. So if you want to get your ideas across online, if you want to share your work, if you want to communicate about policies, or if you want to code the web, if you actually want to write it, English really is quite necessary. And there's a lot of work that's being done to change that. But at the moment, it is a strong imbalance. So we've been building up something called the State of the Web, which is an iteration of this. So we're really excited about that as something that could be coming soon to say, well, what is our current state, given many factors of what are threats to the web and what are gaps that remain. But the work that Kaushalya and I have been driving forward from the policy team at the Web Foundation is something called the Contract for the Web. So if you're thinking of, well, how do you make a free and open web for everybody around the world? You need a set of principles. You need some kind of guiding document. And so we worked with 80 different organizations around the globe, and we put together from those conversations, from that dynamic engagement, what are the roles and responsibilities for governments, for companies, and for global citizens? What is the task that needs to be taken forward to ensure that the web is open, free, safe, and empowering for everyone? Those engagements sometimes look like this, but they are, this is our Women's Rights Online network. These are the kinds of people that we really listen to and we really work for. So we landed on these principles: the roles of government, the roles of companies, and the roles of citizens. The link for Contract for the Web is below. And these are great principles, and they require a ton of work. They are also very much value statements. And so when you go to a company or you go to a government and you say, we want you to enact these values, they say, well, what does that mean? And help me write the policy and implement the policy change that will actually get us there. And so we built something called the Technology Policy Design Lab that Kaushalya mentioned earlier. I'll circle back to that one. So the Technology Policy Design Lab is actually taking the vision of the contract of the web and operationalizing it. Let's tackle one specific topic. Let's take that similar multi-stakeholder process and let's engage on that topic and say what change needs to be made. And with all these stakeholders at the table, if they all agree and decide that this is the change that's needed, we can implement that and it will be supported going forward. So that's the basic outline, the basic philosophy of why we have a lab approach to this work. So these workshops kind of look like this. We've really been running them a lot, of course, during lockdown, but it's been great to have them global and online around the world. And the work that Kaushalya has been leading that she'll share more on is on taking deceptive design and moving it into trusted design. So when we think of deceptive design, we're mostly thinking of when you click to subscribe to something. Yes, that sounds great. I want to sign up for it. But then you have to call, you have to write, you have to figure out, how do I get myself unsubscribed from the service? Usually a service that comes with funding and finance. You're with a payment service that you have to pay your way through. So, and the ways to cancel this can be really difficult. So a few examples. Now that I've had this up on the screen for a moment, can you figure out which button you're supposed to be pushing in order to actually change your service? It's continue. So you want to cancel your membership, you don't press cancel, you press continue to cancel your membership. Here's another one. So I like this sort of very passive aggressive, yes, I'm paying more than I need to. So you have to go very low at the bottom of the page to really find what you're actually asking the website to do. And then there is a very long, and we are all quite familiar with these requests for cookies. And what exactly do you need to click here in order to change your cookie preferences? So there's 3 different links. There's a button, and you have to actually click on cookie preferences in order to even get to a screen to identify where you don't want to be tracked. So we call all of these deceptive practices. And I think the work that we've done through our labs, and here's some of the a visualization of the discussions that we've had in these workshops, are really very much about trying to identify, what are the harms, what are the problems online, and we can focus a lot on where there are problems. But if you want to get traction and you get people onto your side and you really get people excited about what they could build, you need to be talking about trusted design. What is the better way to be? So it's not just what problems do we have, but what are we trying to build? And so here we have different, another workshop that we held, or a component of various workshops that we've held on what's the next step? What could the future look like? What are we trying to work toward? And how could we work together for that? So I'm really excited about some upcoming launches of trusted design and how that will appear in the space. One project that I've been working on a lot is gender rights and gender rights online, and how to use this very similar model of a tech policy design lab to actually combat some of the greatest harms that are happening online based on people's gender and the violence and harassment that follows. So those of us, many of whom are joining this conference, who work on gender, use this quote, which is that the future is here, but as we all know, it is not very evenly distributed. So I'll just give you a few quick data points on this. Men are almost a quarter more likely to have even access to the internet than women are. So how do we even get people online to be able to have their voice heard? In Chile, and those who are most attacked online tend to be politicians. In Chile, 75% of messages to female politicians on Twitter alone are violent or they're insulting. So every time you go online, if you're a politician, the message that you receive are virulent and they're attacking you. So why would you even engage in a virtual public life? Well, you have to engage there because so much of the world is online, and so much of the way to get a voice to your cause happens online. And so there's just a very different experience of being online and being in the world if you're a woman, if you're a woman of color, depending on where you are around the world. Your experience of being online is one of harassing and attacking and not of being empowered. In this slide, there is a quote from Hera Hussein, who is one of our partners. She runs an organization called CHAN, which provides services for people who are survivors of sexual violence and assault and harassment, either offline or online. The quote is not appearing on this slide that is shared here, but she really speaks about the perils of building an online space where we're losing the voices of women, the voices of queer people, the voices of those who've been marginalized, and we're increasingly having an online space that is more friendly to those who are used to being in power and who are comfortable committing acts of violence and harassing others, and how dangerous that is to have that be the disconnect and the divide online. So what is the prevalence? Well, Google and The Economist worked together in 2019, just before the pandemic hit, and they found that 85% of people who identified themselves as women said that they have experienced themselves or they have witnessed harassing and violence language online. So if it doesn't seem like a problem to everybody, it very much is. There is a global experience of the internet not being a safe space and an empowering space. So what can we do about it? So we worked across the globe. You can see our participants, some who have joined this workshop, thank you all so much, who have come together and looked at, well, how can we actually address this problem, and who can be partners with us. So again, these workshops are often very virtual. We were able to host one in person, and that was one of the first times that anybody had gathered together after lockdown. And so that was obviously a very joyful experience. It makes a big difference when you can actually see each other and support each other and work together, especially on these very difficult and very emotional issues. So what did we accomplish? Well, we got sort of the big, 4 of the biggest proponents and offenders of violence online, TikTok, Meta, Google, and Twitter, to make specific commitments. So they changed their curation requirements. How is it easier to identify what it is that you see online when you're on one of their platforms? When you're harassed, how do you report it? So there's a curation and reporting commitments that they all said that they would take forward. Easier to report harassment, easier to flag it, easier to get it taken down. And we just sort of run a 1-year review, and they've all made updates. So these are all the 4 different platforms. These are their interfaces, and they've said, look, it's easier to leave a conversation. It's easier to click onto safety mode. It's easier to flag a problem. And they've said, we have made great progress. Please tell everybody all the great work we've done. And we said, well, it looks very good, but we actually don't know if this has changed anybody's experience because you haven't shown us any data. So we're going back to the beginning. We don't know unless we can count it and unless we can measure it. And because we don't have any baselines from these companies and these organizations that say, here's how many people are being harassed, here's how many of them are women, we don't know whether any of the work that they're doing is actually improving that space. So what do we do? Now we are working on landscaping and trying to actually get that data. Much of that gets reported either from researchers, from nonprofits, from gender justice and digital rights organizations in country on the ground. They're the people, they're the organizations that people who've been harassed go to and say, what can I do? So they have a lot of this data. So we're looking at how can we collect that? How can we aggregate it? How can we make it easier to identify and support? Really following up with those organizations to increase their commitments. And then finally, to work with civil society around the globe. Because what we find with the tech companies is they tend to pick off different groups of civil society and narrow them down to say, well, we've addressed this one problem that you've said, and then we've addressed this different problem. But to be able to actually have everybody working together and say, as a single voice, we think that this is a really big, important priority. That's really what we're working toward in this space. So I'll just leave you with, as we say, it really took all of us to build this web. We never say the web is built. We say it's constantly evolving and we're constantly creating the web. And we really need to work together to be able to secure the next step in its future. So the work that we're doing on landscaping data, on landscaping policies, and on figuring out, who are the organizations, who are the governments, who are the nonprofits that are really driving on work on identifying harassing language online and how it affects people offline. That is active work. And so if any of you are interested in being involved in that, please do get in touch. You have our contact information here, and we always stand ready to reach out and support. And I will turn over to Kaushalya to share more about the process of human-centered design work through our Tech Policy Lab. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And that really sets the the beginning for what we're going to share out more widely. The whole idea of this session is so that you can actually go back and try and kind of learn from our experiences, as well as think about and reflect on your own experiences. Think about an issue that you care deeply about or your organization is working on, and see how you could kind of perhaps apply some of these, or get back to us and tell us what you felt was kind of not right, what could be improved. And so it's basically, we're here to kind of learn from you as much as we hope that you'll be able to kind of learn from our processes. So so I think with what Katherine just shared was, how we've actually managed to apply these in our projects. And so in my presentation, I'll be sharing more about, how we kind of do what we do. So if we see, there's this very interesting quote about how, historically, designers, like people who design for the web, and as well as, they've lived parallel lives to policymakers and public administrators. But this is changing as governments across the world experiment with design and innovation methods. And these methods can basically help strengthen your understanding of citizens' needs, of user needs, and add value to the daily work practices and bring new life to old problems. So design thinking is all about really focusing on the user and focusing on a solution, a minimum viable product that companies can run with, that governments can run with, that users are satisfied with. So it's a great thing that, before design thinking was far more of, a very niche kind of like approach, but now it's so widely used. Governments use it, companies use it, people in civil society like us are using it. So this is basically an approach that you can use to kind of like inform your work, make it more about the user, and kind of like build multi-stakeholder solutions. So I'll start with this first case study of one of our projects, the one that I've been running. This is on tackling deceptive design, which Kat just shared what deceptive design is, and moving towards trusted design. So basically, the design of digital products, services, and platforms should always respect and protect human rights, user rights especially, and it should be built around user needs, from the initial user research to the ongoing use of the product. So it's not just about launching a product and with the user in mind, but how is the user experiencing it? Where does the user kind of find the product to be kind of difficult? Like, which website is annoying? Is it difficult for the user to report online abuse? So these are like things that you need to think about. And some of these are very apparent when you're kind of launching an innovation, but like some of these become more apparent with use. And that's why with, human-centered design, it's not just a one-time use process. It's something that you use throughout. So even after you've launched a product or a project, even after you've kind of onboarded users and they're using it, you need to constantly have feedback loops to kind of understand, observe your users, ask your users, even sometimes put yourself in the shoes of the users to see how are they experiencing it. And so something that we've noticed at the Web Foundation, is the fact that firstly, the web is for everyone. It wasn't really created for the global north. It was created for the entire world. And that's where, in the global south is where majority of the users kind of live and use the web. But, often we find that the research, the kind of policies that come out, they're kind of developed in the global north, in Silicon Valley, where most of the tech companies are. And so, the people who are experiencing the most harms, in this case from deceptive design, or whether it's online gender-based violence, or whatever problem that you may be working on, or someone else in some other part of the world is working on, there are a lot of vulnerable and marginalized groups that really are left out of the conversation. So I think, what we've kind of tried to prioritize is how could we design for them, and how could we kind of create research that is evidence-based and focuses on issues and focuses on the lives of the people, the intersecting identities of the people who are outside Europe or the US, or as Kat was mentioning, the English-speaking world. And so since technology is kind of disproportionately developed in the United States, a lot of the people who are actually experiencing the most harms from deceptive designs, or any group or any issue that you can really think about, actually belong to other parts of the world, and they come from vulnerable groups, marginalized groups. And so here's an example of how paying $1 a month for a subscription that you can't get out of is actually far bigger of a hole in the pocket of someone, let's say, living in India. This was from a participant from, I think, Chile or Peru in our workshop. And $1 a month isn't that bad for, let's say, someone in, or it could be bad for someone from a marginalized group living in Europe. But I'm just saying that comparatively, some of the harms experienced in the global south can be much, much worse and exacerbated due to the existing kind of challenges that people face in the global south, like where I come from. And so we found that, it's really important that we design with the users as well as for your users. And so later on in the presentation, I'll share some of the kind of approaches that we've used to kind of like put ourselves in the shoes of the users. But like, it's really important when we kind of create a product is not just immediately jump into who your target audience is, but also members of at-risk communities. So that, and these are people who are like children, young people, youth, senior citizens, the elderly, or parents, grandparents, migrants, people of color, people from different sexual orientations, people who are economically disadvantaged, people who are new to the web, people who are just accessing the web from a smartphone where it's far more difficult to navigate than, let's say, a laptop where your screen is very big, people with lower educational levels. So it's really important that we really focus about women, people from, beyond the global north bubble, and really think about the world of people, the entire world of web users. And so, I'd actually like to kind of share an article that actually, which is very interesting, because as Kat was mentioning about, I'm just sharing this in the chat for you, about, deceptive designs and how it's actually, that's amazing, Florence, that you believe 100% design thinking. It's really a collaborative process. And so I just shared an article, and if I'm able to, I will try and see if I can actually show you what's really exciting about this article. But please excuse my very basic Zoom kind of capabilities. So trickling credit is like mobile phone users in Ghana actually pay for unknown subscriptions, which is kind of really, this is not just a problem in Ghana, this is a problem all over the world. But I just found this this article, which is actually very interesting. And it has quotes from people. It's like, my credit finishes too early. And someone else is saying that I'll buy 5 series of credit, and after making just 2 calls, it tells me you don't have enough credit. So what really comes through here is the frustration, the financial harm that is actually happening to users like Afia and Abena, and how they just don't know how my credit finishes too early. It's just a mystery. So if you just see, this article actually talks about how users are talking about how they have no idea. So we want, companies to kind of not only make the internet safer for users, but also design around people like Abina and Afia, and think about them, who are actually suffering at because they don't know what's happening and where the credit is going. So what we're going to actually talk about is not just the people who are at risk, but also regular web users who are just clueless about, how to get redressal for things, how to actually feel safe, feel empowered, use the internet for actually doing better for, what the basic web was used for. So if you actually see this, this is basically one approach, which is a systems map. So if you see, the web users are actually right in the middle, those are the most affected people. But web users don't just work in isolation, they actually work within a huge system. So if we see in the systems map, there are people like designers, there are design educators, there are media houses, there are product teams, there are tech companies. So when we actually think about the users, we also have to think about the entire ecosystem at play, right? Because it's being designed by governments, being designed by lawyers and regulators. So in a way, it's very important to kind of think about the interactions between these people. How can they actually, come together and kind of co-create solutions that can actually empower the users. So if we kind of look at the work that Kat has been doing on tackling online gender-based violence. In the initial work, we actually had 5 personas, and these focused on, women with intersecting identities. So these were kind of developed based on the evidence from our consultations, the project team's kind of expertise on the subject, as well as desk research. So we actually spoke to a lot of stakeholders to kind of come up with 5 personas. I've only shared 2 here, but one is, for example, a university student in Brazil, another is a politician in UK, and how they actually experience large volumes of abuse, and different, what does their daily life look like? What is the interaction with the web? And how does, what does harm look like from their point of view, not the tech company's point of view, not the government's point of view, but the user's point of view. So actually, if you kind of think from personas, so if you're let's say focusing on a problem like trickling credit in Ghana, there were examples of what Abina was facing. So likewise, you could probably be thinking about a different issue. It could be misinformation, algorithmic transparency, it could be anything, but like, what is the end user facing? Think about it from their point of view, kind of think about a persona and what their interaction is. So there are actually quite a few frameworks, but like given the paucity of time, I haven't really gone deep into them, but like I'm happy to share them after the call. I mean, after the presentation is over. There is the AEIOU framework. It's fairly easy to remember because it's all the vowels in the English alphabet, the AEIOU framework, which also, you know, that kind of helps to kind of think about how a user interacts with a service or a product. There's journey mapping, where you can also think about when the user first logs into the device, how does the user kind of experience reporting a harm? So I think, so in this work on tackling online gender-based violence, we actually thought about it from, you know, a person who's suffering, a person who's been harmed. How easy or how difficult is it for them to access help or get help or get justice for something that's going wrong on the web? So, I mean, that's a journey mapping approach. So there are many, many approaches. I think the challenge is not really like finding approaches because they're all over the internet. Harvard Business School has them, Stanford D School has them, IDEO, that's an institute which is great for design thinking. They have it. There's the Luma Institute. So there are a lot of organizations with a lot of tools. And that's why I'm not kind of like going over each tool, because it's really up to you to decide which tool works best. But like at the end of this workshop, I think my hope is that you come away with two things. One is, in future, whenever you're doing anything, think about the user, how they experience what you're producing, your product or your service, how do they experience it? And secondly, think about solutions instead of the problem. So like, how can we think of minimum viable products? Like that is win-win, that governments are going to agree to, that companies are going to agree to, that civil society is happy with, that users are ultimately like confident and feel that their trust is being respected. So if we kind of look here, and the credit here goes to Harvard Business School, but this is generally this is, sorry, my presentation is a little wonky here, but if you look here, this is basically the 4 stages of design thinking, which you probably don't need for all problems. Sometimes you can actually focus on the first stage, depending on what is the problem that you're going to solve. And also in terms of time frame, in terms of methods, there are a variety of ways. Like Kat was mentioning, there were in-person meetings, we had online sessions. So depending on your budget, the time frame, the issue at hand, you can actually kind of like customize how much time you want to spend in each of these phases. But like the first phase is on clarify. Like, and once again, it comes back to the user. Like, we need to make concrete observations about the users, like really think about what is the user experiencing, and then reframe the problem to actually gain insights on deeper user needs. So instead of like being like, how can we actually change this button on XYZ platform, we can actually think of the problem as more like, how might we make XYZ platform safer for women and young girls and easier for them to report an issue? So like at the end of the day, like when you're actually framing a problem, like instead of just dealing with the problem, let's frame the question in a way that it actually kind of like takes us more to the solution. So that's the clarify phase. It's really about framing the problem from the user point of view. The second one is ideate. So you think about different design principles that'll actually help you kind of develop the solution. And so over here, they talk about cognitive fixedness. Cognitive fixedness is nothing but, it's just a term used for, we have a set pattern. We usually think in a certain way, and we have, sometimes it's really important to kind of break out of that mold and to kind of generate innovative ideas that can fulfill user needs based on your research. So how can we actually like get past what is status quo or what already exists and think about how can we do things differently? And this is where your research kind of comes in. And the third phase is to develop, like how can we actually go through a range of solutions that have been identified, through our research processes, and kind of like prototype quickly and try to kind of answer critical questions about the viability. So once again, the two important things that that I mentioned is the user needs, and the second is viability. So for the innovation, for your solution to actually work, it needs to be viable. So the sooner you kind of test out your different range of solutions, you'll kind of save more resources and time. It's okay to fail. That's the beauty of design thinking, like the ability to fail fast, learn from your mistakes, and iterate. A failure in design thinking doesn't mean it's the end of the journey. It actually means that it's the start of another round of iteration. So that's why I think design thinking is one of those really productive methods where you actually learn more from failure than actually succeeding. So, prototype quickly and try to see if this is going to be a viable solution, and then ultimately implement, like apply the principles, like communicate it with your stakeholders. That's once again very important, stakeholder buy-in, which I'll kind of get to later on. And think about sustainability, think about accountability. How can you manage this innovation in the future? Is it sustainable? Does it always need help from you, or can other people actually take your work forward? So, it's really a long, but actually it's not a long process. It really depends on how long you want to spend on it, but it's a full cycle. You're not just coming up with a solution, but you're really thinking about it all the way through, whether it works. If it doesn't work, how can we make it work? And who are the people who are going to actually take that work forward? So it's actually a very foolproof methodology, which kind of has at least for our tech policy design lab, it kind of has these 4 pillars. The first pillar is about bringing together multiple inputs and methodologies. As I mentioned, there's no dearth of actually design thinking tools out there. And so we can just go out there. The web is basically it's full of so much information, and it's kind of very democratized. You can access it. So it's really about how can we bring together all these inputs, all the research from others, all the evidence, and think about the different methodologies. The second pillar is about gaining empathy for the people impacted by policy at scale. It's really, really important that to think about it from the user point of view, especially the most marginalized and the vulnerable. And the third pillar is prototyping policy by sketching solutions. So it's really, once again, reiterating, not really about spending too much time on the problem, but really thinking positively and in a constructive way to think about solutions. And the last and the most important, well, that's not the most important pillar. All of these pillars are equally important to keep any building up. All the pillars have to be the same height and structure. So the cross-sector goodwill and buy-in. And the brilliance of the Tech Policy Design Lab approach is that these 4 are in constant engagement with each other, these 4 key components. It's not sequential. It's not like you use different methodologies throughout. You think about the users throughout. You kind of like are thinking about the solutions throughout the project. And it's extremely critical that you bring in the people who you want to take the work forward, who are actually going to implement the solutions right at the beginning of this process, because that's what builds the trust. And it's all about working together to create the solution. I think the methodology stresses more on how you solve the problem and not what the solution is. So to go in deeper, when we think about bringing together multiple inputs and methodologies, there are different ways you can do that. One is a policy landscape. Just what are the existing regulations out there? What are the existing solutions out there? You can look at demographics and quant, like numbers out there, the data that's available. You can look at behavioral sciences. For example, in our project on deceptive design, it's interesting. The term deceptive design is fairly new, but it kind of builds on behavioral science from Thaler and Sunstein, who are like behavioral scientists. I mean, they still are, but some of their older research. So, I mean, you can always borrow from other streams. And you can look at economics and macroeconomics. You have to really think about it from a broad range of, resources and other inputs, like, for example, consultations, talking to people. Like, the fact is, your evidence gathering phase is something that is continuous, and the resources really depend on the scale of the project that you want to kind of conduct, the time frame for your project, the resources that you have for the project, and also the availability of existing resources. So for some issues, there's abundance of information. For some, I think we have to be the pioneers of creating that research. And design thinking lends beautifully if you're trying to kind of break into a problem where there's not enough real research out there. And then the second pillar is really about gaining empathy for the people impacted by policy at scale. So how, like, step into the shoes of the people. So if you are focusing on, I mean, it's kind of challenging for me to see the chat while I'm sharing my slides, but it'd be wonderful to kind of like hear what is that challenge that you're working on. It doesn't have to be a technology policy challenge. It could be something about the climate. It could be about socioeconomic policy, but and that's the beauty of design thinking. You step into the shoes of the people. Think about it, like if you want to share it in the chat, that's wonderful, the problem that you're working on. But like as we share this, like really, it would be brilliant if you could actually think about how you could apply this to your work. So whatever the problem might be, the personas, like what we just shared earlier, there were 2 personas, but we actually have 5 of people who are impacted on the web. And for example, the article that I shared, those kind of quotes, those could be developed into personas as well, right? So from user interviews, from talking to civil society groups, from people who work closely with the people who are affected, find out how we can build personas, or like these kind of like fictional characters based on like firsthand research, who are actually experiencing the problem. Then there's ethnographic research, like as I was mentioning, the AEIOU framework, which looks at activities, environment, interactions, objects, and users. I think I'll share a link a little in a bit, but the different kind of toolkits out there, like and most of the great design thinking organizations are very democratic with their approaches. So they actually there's tons of resources that you can use to conduct ethnographic research. And the last one is organizations who have a deep understanding of specific people. These could be governments, citizens, companies, and the customers, civil society, and people who are interested, in actually in building solutions for these people. So that's what we do. We work together with all these different stakeholder groups to kind of like learn from them who is being most impacted and what are they doing about it? What could we do collectively together? And then the third pillar is about prototyping the policy by sketching solutions. So, think about the application and kind of work backwards. Like, you've built a product, but it's obviously not doing great. There are challenges. So think about what is the root cause of that? Like, how are people, how would people actually experience this idea? It's not just about the solution, but how does the user really experience it? And a generative approach to move beyond positions and like UX and prototypes as an evidence base. That's if you're focusing more on product, you can also create principles. If you're working on policy, guidelines, norms, there's frameworks that governments can use. So even the outcome is something that really depends on you and what you feel is the solution you're looking for. And the fourth most important pillar here is cross-sector goodwill and buy-in. We really need to work together to break down silos across sectors. Technology is moving so fast that, sometimes regulators can't catch up with the new problems that are surfacing. What we found at least in many countries, including mine, is regulation is slow to catch up because it takes time for academia to push out research. It takes time to actually come up with the solutions. So one great way of doing that is using design thinking and human-centered design, is how we could actually work together with our limited resources. And through the power of partnership, we can actually build the solutions much faster. And so we can have people from different stages of the tech development process at the table together in a neutral generative space. So it's a place where someone from a tech company can feel as confident as someone from civil society. There are no one is more equal than someone else. And really, it's about harnessing and recognizing the expertise and focusing on the collaboration. You can have roundtables, workshops, various avenues. And sometimes when roundtables are not possible or workshops are not possible because of different time zones, availability, you can also have asynchronous reviews. You can get together with people on a smaller scale and actually ask them for feedback, test the recommendations. So it's really about not saying this is my solution, but really this is our solution. And here we come together to actually look at this double diamond approach. If you Google double diamond, you probably will find a lot of information on the double diamond approach, but this diagram is particularly interesting. It's with a lot of hyphens, a difficult to pronounce name, but the double diamond design process was basically popularized by the British Design Council when they observed the design process of designers from 12 leading companies across the world. So if you see the two diamonds here, they represent a process of exploring an issue more widely or deeply. And so that is basically what they call divergent thinking. And then taking, focused action, which is convergent thinking. So at the diverge, you think more deeply and widely. And then when you converge, you're thinking more focused. So once again, you start off by not limiting your options, but then of course you kind of try to tailor it down, and then you again diverge and converge. So the first diamond here, it's often referred to as the stage in the process where we focus on understanding what the right policy design is. So we do this by digging deep into the problem. I mean, the policy is trying to solve. So it's not in analytical terms, but more in qualitative terms, like by talking and observing the people that the policy will impact. So there's one framework, which is the look, ask, try framework. You look around, you look at your users, you ask them what's happening or what are they experiencing. The try part is about you try it from their perspective and you yourself experience the challenges that the users are experiencing. So this is basically about talking and observing the people that the policy will impact. And so by exploring the problem space itself. So this is the first diamond. And then in the second diamond, it's now the shift is from designing the right policy to designing the policy right. So in other words, you want to make sure that the problem and possible solutions that we've identified together in the first diamond are achieved in the best possible way through a well-executed usable policy. So once again, the first focuses more on the user. The second focuses more about the viability. And those are the two core themes of your takeaways from hopefully this discussion. How can we prioritize the users? And B, how can we work together so that we can create win-win viable solutions that companies, governments, users, civil society, everyone is you have the buy-in from everyone required to actually move forward with the policy. So not just creating the right policy, but making sure that right policy is also designed correctly. And very briefly, this is a kind of summary diagram of how we kind of use co-design and design thinking throughout the process of running a tech policy design lab. And so what you see here is, there are personas, there are use cases. We kind of like think about digital products and services. We take inputs from stakeholders, thematics, events, solutions. So we basically do a kind of like a scoping exercise, kind of like landscape exercise to kind of understand what already exists, really think about the users and all the kind of things that we discussed until now, but like leveraging what research has already shown us, leveraging the power of consultations, of listening to others, really hearing what are the kind of challenges and opportunities raised by other people. And so this approach is really one where you can take the back seat. In fact, as a great facilitator, it's the signs of a great facilitator are people who actually make people feel comfortable, make different stakeholders feel comfortable in a room, and actually freely and openly create a safe space where they can actually share and build solutions together. So that's when we come to the co-design workshops, which once again, here is the double diamond approach. So it depends. So for the online gender-based violence workshop, we had 3 prototyping sessions. So they were all the same workshop. That's because we had consultations and we had roundtables at the beginning, and we built up an evidence base through that. But that doesn't mean that's the only correct way of doing it, because in the more recent tech policy design lab on deceptive design, we actually had 4 different styles of workshops. The first was to diverge, the second to converge, the third to diverge, and the fourth to converge. So it really depends, once again, on the timeline that you have for the problem, the nature of the problem, the speed at which you want the outcomes. But these are generally how you can actually conduct the co-design workshops. You can have one for, let me just go back here. Sorry, this is going backwards. It just refuses to go forwards. But like when we talk about the 4 phases of diverging and converging, you can actually, you can have one workshop on clarifying the problem, one to ideate, come up with, what are the principles that are going to guide your research. Third can be to develop solutions and build prototypes, and your last would be to implement. So there is no correct way. It really depends on what you're trying to solve, the time frame and the budget and all of those kind of different aspects that you're really looking at. But these 4 could also be like 4 separate workshops. You could also have like, a single workshop if you are just focusing on a specific aspect of the problem. And through these, you actually get a deeper understanding of the problems and the ideas, and these come from diverse perspectives. You can sketch new ideas, you get new insights, you also get the goodwill and trust of the people you're working with. You've broken across silos, like now everyone is on the same page, and you're working towards a common vision with a shared goal. And so this is basically like a kind of like a 3-tier process, but actually like these can be done through a variety of ways. And so a sample process, this is a very text heavy slide, but like it's always easy to screenshot or maybe share out. But what we do is we have consultations. And this is very important because you just don't want to rush and create a workshop. You want to also ask people, what do they want the workshop to be on? So for us, we don't decide what the workshop is going to be on. We actually reach out to stakeholders, ask them, what is the problem that they're solving? Who is the most impacted? What is their research focusing on? How could we help them? So it's really about seeing what is it in it for them as much as, for the entire community. So we need to kind of have a feeling of stakeholdership, and that's where consultations really help. Then we need to synthesize all these consultations to get all these kind of different insights, which we kind of use to design the workshops. So sometimes people use Miro boards, but that's not very accessible. You can use a Google document. You can get together in a room with sticky notes and a chart. You can just have a frank conversation and someone can take notes. But the idea is basically about listening to as diverse voices from different sectors as possible, because you want everyone to come away with something like a minimum viable product or a service that can be tested and put into practice. And then in the fourth stage, you think about publishing it. It doesn't have to be a report. It can be 10 takeaways or whatever. It just needs to be an open source database so that you can get feedback. Feedback is very important here because it's really about being collaborative. So you share out your learnings, but you're still willing to kind of learn more. And then you get commitments. So I think this is one of the most important parts. And so that's why, consultations are very important. Workshops are very important because you're continuously building the relationship so that once you've created what, the product, then it's easier to kind of get people to kind of commit because they feel like they were involved in the process. They feel heard in the process. So that's why design thinking is the double diamond approach is really interesting, because you've engaged your stakeholders at every stage of the process. Versus, let's say, you write out a research paper and then you take it, which is also effective, but when you're actually solving complex challenges which require multi-stakeholder solutions, this is one way of engaging stakeholders throughout. And then, once the people who have the power to make the change, those are governments and companies, you can ask them what needs further refining, what needs to be tested, how can we implement the co-created solutions? And if they feel like, the solutions that we created are not good enough, don't work in their context, we actually continue the process to kind of ask them to develop and propose alternatives so that, we can still solve for the problem. So, it's a chain, but if you see at this part of the chain that the chain is slightly broken, you can, go back, really listen once again and see how you can fix it, listen to others, and then again, implement and test. So you've gotten the commitments, as we mentioned earlier, we got Google, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter, I think, to test our solutions from the first tech policy design lab. But and then, Kat was sharing about the accountability work, saying that just commitments are not enough. What exactly are you doing with the solution? So we need to go back to them. So the project doesn't end with the solution. The project actually continues. You go back, you ask them what they're doing, get the data, see if it's working. If it's not working, iterate. So that's your last, even your solution, even if it's the best solution, the perfect solution, it can always be improved and it can always be made better to serve people better. So the process continues. It's design thinking, although they say is a research methodology or an approach, it's more of like a mindset to problem solving, or that can be applied for any kind of issues, not just limited to tech policy issues. And so here is our website where you can actually learn more about the lab and see our work. There's information there about our core guiding values, who we work with. We'd love for you to kind of give us feedback, if possible, on what you feel is probably can be improved, what you like about our approach. And you can always reach out to us via email. All our emails are here. And if you're doing a similar participatory approach, maybe not design thinking or human-centered design that we could learn from, then that's also, we're really open to learning methodologies that work. Like we recently worked with Tech Hive Advisory in Nigeria. They used a hackathon approach. So it's kind of, it's also a very participatory way of, getting different stakeholders together. So design thinking is a certain approach, like the double diamond approach. But if you look at human-centered design, that's more about a mindset, right? To always think about your users first. And so there can be a plethora of different kind of methods that you can use based on the needs of the project. And so we, like, for example, we learned more from the hackathon approach from Tech Hive Advisory. But if you're using a similar approach that we could learn from, it would be, please share it in the chat, drop links to your work that we can learn from. The thing about our approach is it's not an approach set in stone. It's an approach which is constantly looking for ways to improve. But this is a kind of snapshot of what this approach kind of gets you. So like, for example, the prototypes, right? These are from 2 different projects. The one to your left is from the work on online gender-based violence. These are just visuals that I'm sharing. So when you go to our website, you can actually see more about it. But these kind of visuals that you see are how, smartphone apps or websites can actually be designed better from, the user point of view. Like, for example, if you see the one on the right, typically when you kind of like have to like agree to giving up your password or consenting to cookies or anything subscribing, the yes button is always more attractive and visually appealing, and the no button is usually either light gray or something that is faint and not easy to kind of like see. So like, for example, the one on the left is the better approach. We don't say it's the best approach. These are good practices. So what we're trying to do right now for this project is put out a list of what good looks like, because often when we hear in the industry, when we attend panel discussions, when we go out to networking events, when we talk to stakeholders, we always listen about what's going wrong, what's bad, what needs to be regulated, what the fine amount should be, that regulators are not fining big tech enough. But what if we could actually come up with a solution of what good looks like, so that we don't only have to focus on stopping bad practices, but we can actually create, like, through this design thinking process, work together with the community to create a mindset shift to actually think about focusing on the user, creating, trustworthy, transparent, fairer and better policies, better products and services that users like, and that empower users and respect user autonomy. So it's really about focusing not on the problem, but really on the solution. And that's kind of like what this mindset does. So in summary, when you go back or you're doing any project that you're doing, think about the people using that project, people who are benefiting from that project, the people who this project is about. And secondly, solutions, not just solutions that are, in your opinion, the best solution, but solutions that are collaboratively agreed upon as the best solution. So it could be a different solution from what you had originally thought of, but it's really about the stakeholder buy-in. It's about the collaboration. It's about the multi-stakeholder process. So, and hopefully after this, you spend time like reading more, checking out all these interesting toolkits that are available and applying it to your work. And the good thing about design thinking is it doesn't have to be, there are experts out there. You can also become an in-house expert by just through self-motivation and learning online. And so it's really a skill, it's a mindset approach, and you can apply to, almost quite a broad range of issues. And with that, I am stopping the screen share. I hope that was useful. Okay, now the questions, because we didn't kind of, okay, do users always know what they want? Okay, that's a very interesting question, Florence. There are two kinds of, this is actually, there are two kinds of needs. One are needs that are actually like pain points or pain areas that are already identified by the user. Those are things that people kind of report. When you have user testing, it comes up that users found this annoying, found this problematic, they want something better. So those are established needs. And the second type of needs are actually the more complex ones. They're called latent needs. So latent needs are needs that users have, but they're not aware of it, so they don't voice it. Like, for example, a latent need was when we had phones with buttons. We didn't really need a smartphone with a touchscreen. So that was a latent need. But today, if you ask people to buy a phone, they will go for the one with the touchscreen. So a latent need is kind of difficult to kind of address. The easier needs to address are the ones that are, the pain points that are already kind of established by users from user research, from user testing. Those are the easier ones. Those are the lower hanging fruits. But innovation is constantly trying to also kind of like look at the latent needs. Like, for example, when we went from a Walkman to now Bluetooth earphones and wireless listening to music on a phone, that was a latent need. But today that has become a need, right? So if you look at technology, those big paradigm shifts that happen are actually from people who innovate by recognizing the latent needs of users. And let's see, any other questions? How do users communicate your needs and pain point? Okay, that is where, yeah. So I think this really depends on from companies. Like nowadays, companies have huge teams that actually focused on customer success, customer retention, customer needs, and feedback loops. So that's where you actually get to know the user needs and pain points. Unfortunately, a lot of these tech companies don't kind of publish these data, like this kind of data online, but you can actually look at reviews on websites. You can look at research, like, the link that I shared about trickling credit in Ghana and how there's deceptive design there. There are researchers, there are journalists, there are academics, there are a lot of people who are actually, conducting primary research. There's data analytics. So it's really about finding that information, and where information is lacking, what you can do is build personas, think about who's most impacted, and create journey maps. So let me try and see what journey maps are. And let me share an article with you so that journey mapping. Yes, I found an article which is quite great. Sorry. And so, yeah, I'm just dropping this here. So you can use customer journey maps user journey maps and different kind of like methods to, yeah. Does anyone have like any interesting issues that they're working on? Any issue like where you think that design thinking could potentially help you, or thinking about human-centered design would help you kind of like find the solution to the problem?
We are designing an impact dashboard for one of our clients, and it's a process. You know, during design, especially if you're working for a client, you do mock up like wireframes for acceptance, and then they accept it. And then now when you go back and you do the actual development, there is still more. They still give you feedback. You know, so for me, it's like a dilemma. You want to wear a dress. I've designed a dress for you. You said it's okay. Now I sew the dress and I bring it. I start, and then you start, no, I want it this way. I want it this way. I want it this way. Like, I'm just trying to see where do you perfect design thinking? And how do you perfect it to a point where, okay, you know that you like this, and this is it, and that is it, and it will remain like that for at least for some time.
Yes. So in a way, like Florence, that's actually the question that everyone is dealing with. Like it's just not you. It's, you know, this, especially when you work with clients or you work for anyone, like in our case, we work with our stakeholders, right? Everyone has a set idea about what they want, and you are probably doing something, you're following your own approach. So if you kind of like checked out different tools and thought about the user, so not just about the product that you're actually creating, like the dashboard that you're talking about, but thinking about the end user and what their needs might be, and also involve them throughout the process. So it means more engagement, more strategic engagement with them, like perhaps like conducting a small workshop with them at the project launch to kind of understand what is it that they want out of the dashboard, what is the purpose that they're going to use it for. I mean, these are things like, you know, when projects are sanctioned, people give you a kind of like terms of reference, a proposal, but like a proposal is kind of more like, it is co-created in a sense, but it's not really multi-stakeholder. So instead, if you kind of co-designed the dashboard and thought about it from the user journey right from the start, involve the users. So like not just had a meeting, not just have a meeting with them to check in or review the progress, but involve them in actually creating, the product together. Then that's actually, it's not guaranteed, but there's a higher likelihood that they won't say, I wanted something completely different. Then they would you'd get the buy-in at every stage. Sometimes like design thinking feels like a speed breaker, because it's much slower when you actually have to schedule calls, ask people to kind of get together and all of that. But in the long run, like once the people that you're building this for feel involved in the process and they feel heard, then there's a higher likelihood of the output having an acceptance, or having that, that candid kind of like the rapport with them, the goodwill with them to actually implement the product that you've kind of used. So yeah. So if you're creating a dashboard, may I know, Florence, like who are you creating this dashboard for? Like who are the end users of this product?
Oh, the end user is a company, and I mean, they want to track impact across board, impact of their various projects that they are implementing in Ghana. And so, I mean, hypothetically, they'll give you what they assume that they want, and use that to design your wireframes and then your mock-ups. and then you show it to them and they give you feedback. And then now you go back to code to actually do the code. And then when you are doing the code, it feels like the entire mockup, because the mockup process and wireframe process takes some time as well to make sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed.
Yes.
So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And that's why we do the mockups in the wireframe right at the end. So in the double diamond, like first you diverge and you converge, and then you diverge and then you converge. So the last point of convergence is when you kind of like create your wireframe. So before that, you kind of like create a mockup or a prototype of what the wireframe would look like, and then kind of like ask them to think about it from the user perspective. So yeah, so that company is probably doing an impact assessment because they want to perhaps show it to the donors or who is the ultimate user. So we have to really think about them. And something that I also grapple with, and Florence, like you must be like an expert on this, but I'm not a designer. I'm not a UX UI designer. And I've been working with product teams of companies, and I have a policy background. Like I know how to work with regulators. I work with governments. I know how to do policy research, but I don't understand like UX, UI, prototyping. All of these things are fairly like newer skills. So that's why from my experience, I feel like design thinking is great because everyone comes with a different perspective. So I would look at your wireframe and come from a policy perspective. You are probably coming from a design perspective. So the more spaces you have for people to kind of like, have a shared language or a shared vocabulary, start speaking the same thing, so that by the end of the process, everyone's on the same page. So, and then you can also think about, there is this framework, like observation framework. And I just shared this link, but there are also like many other frameworks, like you can check it out. I think it's by, I've forgotten the name of the original institute that actually invented this. But, you think about the activities, the environments, the interactions, the objects, and the users. So sometimes what we do is we only think about the users, but we also have to think about the environment in which the user is interacting with the product. Do they have good internet speed? Are they in the same time zone? What medium are they accessing? So it's really about the, like I shared one link about the customer journey maps. But also this is kind of helpful. Oh, thank you, Juliet. Implement a part of this. Yes, design thinking is a free, it's really an approach. IDEO has amazing, let me actually try and see in this little time if I can just drop, I should have done this earlier, but like there are amazing tools that I can, let me just try and open out a few links where you can actually find great. Yeah, yes. So this is IDEO. They have amazing tools that you can check out. And, like, for example, Florence, like once you go through these tools, you'll probably find the tool that's perfect for you. So I'm kind of like biased towards tools that have been helpful for us in our project, but there are so many tools to choose from. And then the Stanford D School is, I think, fantastic. They have a lot of tools. So this is the second link. I am just quickly going. I have a, for people with more of a design background, I think this would be interesting. The first two are great for everyone, but if you're more from a design background, maybe Florence, this might be helpful for you. The third link. And there's also Meta actually has a very interactive, so Meta, like Facebook, has like an in-house lab. So they do something similar to what we do, but what we do is we kind of build for the entire community, but Meta kind of does it for Facebook and Instagram. but they are transparent about the toolkit that they use. And I think their toolkits are very interactive. In fact, we'll be coming out. So if you kind of like keep in touch with us, then we'd be coming out with a product very soon about how to kind of run your own tech policy design labs, but specifically focused on online gender-based violence. But as you observe from, hopefully from my presentation, is this can be applied to any issue, really. It doesn't have to be limited to a specific domain. Yeah, so these are 4 links. You just keep them open in your tabs and bookmark them. You will find lots of great stuff.
Something useful. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Does anyone have? Okay, Juliet. Yes, I hope some of these links are helpful. And I think also there's another session recording. I didn't attend that session, but I don't know, maybe Linda, if she's here. I don't know if Linda's here, but there is another recording. There might be a recording of the previous webinar, which was an introduction to design thinking. Yeah. So I think that would be a great start. So once you kind of know what it is about, it's like it's this universe full of tools. And but at the end of the day, like, you can actually do these tools, like use them very quickly. You can also take your time over using it. Like, it's really it's really open-ended how you want to use these things, depending on your project, budget, resources. Sometimes you don't have enough people to kind of like conduct big workshops. So then maybe have smaller workshops, maybe have 3 people instead of 20. So yeah, it's all flexible. You just, yeah. You need, okay, why? Okay. Rebecca only sees 1 link. Oh, it was done in French. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, je ne comprends pas français. Yeah. So
Rebecca, I'll repost the links.
I'm trying to repost the links. Okay. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. These are amazing resources. Like, can one do design thinking with no initial user research? It depends. Like, anything you do would actually have a little bit of user research, right? So it depends on the time frame you have, the resources you have. If you don't have time to actually conduct a large scale user research using personas or journey maps or the AEIOU framework, what you could do is, I mean, that's actually, I'm actually like fascinated by the question. I'm actually thinking right now. Design thinking is really the process. Human-centered design is what is more about the user-centric component. So you may not have to go out and conduct research on the users, like by going out yourself and doing it, but you can like put yourself in their shoes. If you're an expert on that area, you can actually you can predict, you can project what their pain areas are, what their latent needs might be. But I think, like when sometimes like all the big companies, like the ones which have users hooked to their products and services, they have huge teams to focus on user needs, customer experience. Governments now have service designers, design thinking, they hire those. And that's why the whole objective of this workshop was, you don't have to necessarily go out and spend big money trying to get people to do that for you. You can actually go through these tools yourself and find something that fits your purpose. Like, you don't have to do a huge 1 year long project like we did. You can probably spend 2 hours, talk to 5 customers, talk to 5 users, get candid feedback, through a feedback form. But like ideally, if you're building something for users, it's good to kind of like understand their needs, because that reduces the chance of having misaligned products and services from what the users want. So you want the uptake to be there. You want people to use your product, right? So yeah, so it's good practice, but like there are many ways. There's no correct way. So you can do the user research yourself if you're short of time and resources, is my answer. You can think about it from their point of view. And I think we're exactly on the 90-minute mark. If you have any more questions, let me just see. You have my email. Let me just also see if you can also find me on LinkedIn. You can add me. I'm happy to actually take up these questions, and I'm really happy to learn from the work that you all are doing, right? And see how these help. And please, like whatever you learned today, please pass it on to others and share out any knowledge that you have. So like I did, I learned it and I'm sharing it with you. So carry it forward. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Linda, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Katherine and Kaushalya. Is it Kaushalya?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's my name, Kaushalya.
Okay, nice. Thank you. We are very grateful.
Thank you, and all the best. I hope the people like your wireframe.
Oh yes. Oh, we've gone far. We've gone far into the product. It's coming out beautifully and nice. So, but it's a good learning experience. And personally, I'm enjoying it. And it helps you to learn. The goal of this is not to feel that the client is being too demanding, but to just tell you that there is a lot more when you are doing design thinking, when you want to get it right, and you must be flexible as well to adapt to the changes that the users want, because design is not about you, it's about who is going to use the product. So till you get to that point where they are comfortable about it, you haven't arrived. So it's good, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us as well.
Oh, thank you, Florence. I learned so much from you. I think your clients are very lucky. They're very lucky to be working with you, because you're really thinking about what they want. And so you're already like using a lot of these principles. Would love to continue learning from you. So please do keep in touch. Thank you all. We're over by 2 minutes. So Linda, please.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
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 Okay, someone said, thank you for a good session and love the crossover from policy to product. And this is one of our facilitators from US, Leaders of Africa. Thank you, Peter, for joining. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Linda, how do we stop the record?
I'll end it. I work with Linda, so I'll end it.
All right.